In this video, we want to talk about barriers to entry. Essentially, what we're talking about here are ways that companies use to block competition, to stop other companies from setting up against them. So let's say a company has got a good, profitable product. It's making good profits and it's enjoying the fruits of perhaps a near monopoly position or a monopoly position in the market. Now, other companies will know it's making good profits and they will want to share those profits. They'll want to start producing a similar product, or perhaps even an identical product, so as to take away some of the profits, and they will then enjoy high profits themselves. To stop the companies from doing that, the original company, who's got the bulk of the market, they will set up barriers to entry. They'll try and block the other companies from setting up. They'll try to preserve their profits. So what we're going to do in this video is to look at some ways in which companies may attempt to block entry. Let's start by just talking about what we call normal and abnormal profits. Now, abnormal profits are profits over and above that necessary to maintain a firm in the industry. In order for a company to continue trading, continue in existence, it must make what we call normal profits. Those are the profits that it must make to give it a return which covers its opportunity cost, covers what could have happened had the business not invested in this way but invested in something else, or even the owners had put the money into the bank. So businesses must cover normal profits. So normal profit is like a cost. Normal profit must be made. If normal profit is not made, the company will liquidate. It'll get out of the business. It's getting a return less than what it could get elsewhere. Abnormal profits are above normal profits. That's when the company is making normal profits and something over and above it. We call these abnormal profits. Sometimes books call them excess profits. They're even called supernormal profits. But however you want to call it, it doesn't matter. These are profits over and above the normal profits. Now, when abnormal profits exist, of course, they are tempting for other companies. Other companies see a company making abnormal profits, making a lot of profit, they will want to join in. So normal profits are only sufficient to maintain a firm in the industry. Any lower and the firm would leave the industry. Abnormal profits are over and above the normal profits. And it means the company is making a lot of profit. Other companies will want to join in, start producing the same product, and in order to stop them coming in, the company is going to need barriers to entry. Now, the types of barrier. Well, you could have product differentiation as a barrier. This is when a company makes its product different, and it tries to have perhaps various versions of the product, all slightly different, which makes it difficult for a company coming in because they're not quite sure which one to copy. There are two types of differentiation that we may distinguish. The first is physical. This is when the products are physically different and it's obvious to the customer that the products are different. Different shape, different size, different design. So there are all sorts of ways in which products can be differentiated. And this means that the company has in a sense created a monopoly for itself because it has a monopoly on the style of the product or on the packaging, or it's got a monopoly on the functionality of the product. So it's differentiated itself from the other producers who are making perhaps similar products or working in the same area. So the company has differentiated its product, and so doing, it marked itself off from the others. The second type of product differentiation is psychological. It's psychic. or psychological differentiation. This means that the customer believes that there is a difference in the products in the market, when in fact the products are essentially homogeneous. They're essentially all the same. But in the mind of the consumer, they are different. Sometimes advertising may be used to generate this. Advertising may be very sophisticated and create images in the mind of the consumer, and they believe that this product is better, it's more fashionable, it's more up to date, it's better quality. So it's differentiation. It's in the mind of the purchaser, and that means the company will enjoy more sales because it has a different product, a more trendy product, a more fashionable product, a more desirable product. So differentiation is one way in which a company can stop barriers to entry. If companies try to copy it, it simply makes its products slightly different, changes the style, has more brand loyalty because of repetitive advertising and good marketing campaigns, so it makes a psychological difference. People believe the product is different. So it's differentiated the product, which means companies who want to copy it and enter what it's doing will find it difficult. There are also legal barriers to entry. For example, dangerous goods. Governments may prohibit competition in certain dangerous goods. The production of certain non-dangerous goods is also controlled. For example, if a company is producing, let's say, explosives under license for the government or for the military, the company has got, it's like a legal monopoly. It doesn't allow, the government doesn't allow everyone to produce explosives. That would be dangerous, to say the least. So the government will create just some companies who will have license to produce goods for the government's use or for the military use or whatever use the government deems appropriate. So in that case, there are barriers to entry. The barrier to entry is simply being blocked, legally being blocked from producing certain goods. Some non-dangerous goods are also controlled. For example, the mint has got a right to produce money. It produces money on behalf, in the UK, on behalf of the Bank of England, on behalf of the Treasury. Printing money presumably is a very profitable business, but we can't start printing money. That's called counterfeiting. It's illegal. It's morally wrong. It's wrong on so many fronts. But it means that some companies have a legal right to produce the item. For example, the mint has a legal right to produce money. Certain companies have legal rights to produce explosives or produce military equipment. So there is a legal barrier, a barrier to entry. The example I've got here is paper money and coinage produced under very restricted conditions, and the example I gave of dangerous goods, explosives and dangerous chemicals. So the government regulates companies for safety reasons, but also sometimes simply for the fact that it needs to control those markets and not have lots of people making dangerous products, which could be dangerous to the rest of the people in the country. Legal is also involves planning permission. Before a new plant can come online, it must be constructed. The government may wish to prohibit construction in certain areas, or may wish to deter certain types of production altogether. For example, nuclear waste processing. So some companies are permitted to do this. Other companies are not. So people apply for a license. The government look at the submissions, the supporting documentation for the license, and will decide which company is best suited to undertake this activity. The license is issued and the rest are then excluded. they can't enter that market. It's a barrier to entry. We also have legal patents, they're called, or patents. Most people, I think, nowadays say patents, and copyright. So sometimes people who have good ideas may protect their idea, their intellectual property, legally. Inventors and innovators are given a period during which competition is not allowed. The reason for that is so that inventors and innovators are rewarded for being inventive and innovative. People who bring new products to the market and who increase our standard of living, our standard of life by innovating products and inventing products, they should be rewarded for their intellect and for their enterprise. So the government allow them a period of time during which there is no competition, and they can make maximum profits. They can make large profits and get a reward for their good idea. After a period of time, let's say 20 years, that right would run out and other companies can then start producing the item. It's enabled them to, as I said, reap high rewards for their inventiveness. Okay, so I've got the dangerous goods one mentioned at the bottom again. Again, it's produced under license, so it is controlled, as I said in the previous slide. Product loyalty could also be a barrier to entry. Persuasive advertising. Advertising tends to be repetitive, and it's driving home the message all the time, so that the product is in the people's minds. When they go shopping, they think about the product, they see the products, and it brings back the advertisements and the glamour of the advertisement. It's persuasive advertising. And if we look at a lot of advertising on television, it is persuasive. If we see an advertisement for a car, we see people driving around the car and smiling and looking like they're having a good time. They don't tell us about the car. They don't tell us about the size of the engine or the braking system or the fuel economy, or they don't tell us very much about it. They don't even tell us the price. They just tell us that if you drive this car, you can drive around smiling. So that's persuasive advertising. Eventually, if we need a car, we go and look at one, we see the car we saw on television, we think if we buy this car, it'll make us happy. So we buy the car. That's simply the reason. It's persuasive, it's trying to persuade people to buy the product. Contrast that with informative advertising. Informative advertising is more prevalent in capital goods industry. If you go to buy a machine, it's informative. They will tell you about the machine, what the machine can do, and the output from the machine, and its energy usage, and so on. It's information about the machine. They're not telling you that if you buy the machine, you're going to go around smiling and you're going to be happy. They tell you what the machine does. So informative advertising, you could say, is somewhat boring. But for people who are interested in buying the machine, it's very interesting, because that's the information they need to make a decision. So there are two types of advertising. Persuasive, which just tries to get us to buy it because it's creating an image in our heads. Or informative advertising, which tells us about the product. As I said with the car, we don't have advertisements telling us about the car, about the engine, or about its performance or whatever. We have just, it's persuasive. Trying to tell us to buy the car, and it'll help us project a very up-to-date image of ourselves, whereas informative advertising would tell us all about the car. There are also technological barriers to entry. For example, specialization. Machines. Some production processes require specialist machines. So not everyone can get into this line of production. You've got to possess one of these machines that does this specialized process. It may be a chemical process. If it's a chemical process, they may require specialist equipment and so on. And That's a barrier to entry. We may know the company is making abnormal profits, but there's nothing we can do about it. We can't set up against them because we don't have access to that machine or those machines. But it's also the case that labour shortages of a specialised nature may act as a barrier to entry of new firms into an industry. Sometimes there's a shortage of skilled labour, so companies can't set up. They know that existing companies are making abnormal profits, but there's nothing they can do about it. They can't get the workers with the appropriate skills to employ, to start making a product in competition, because there's a shortage of skilled workers. It's also the case that the product design, ingredients and composition may be a problem. If a product is made from some obscure compound, or if the design or the ingredients are difficult to copy, then that'll be a barrier to entry. So if the product is made out of something really obscure that needs a lot of processing, chemical processing and so on, and it's very complicated, that's a barrier to entry. Or alternatively, simply the design is very difficult to copy. We may know that computer companies are making abnormal profits, let's say, but I can't make from scratch a laptop computer. I could go to the hardware store and buy some nails and some wire and so on, but it's not going to make a laptop computer for me. I don't have the capacity to do that. I can use a laptop computer, but making one from scratch, that's complicated. So it's a barrier to entry. Resources are also a barrier to entry. Capital, for example, a shortage of capital will act as a barrier to entry. If a potential entrant cannot raise the funds to set up in business, then this is an obstacle or a barrier. We may know that companies are making abnormal profits, but there's nothing we can do about it. We can't go to the bank and borrow X million pounds or X million euros or dollars or whatever, because we don't have the expertise, the structure, the knowledge, the background. We don't have the capability of setting up a company in competition to an established company, and the bank will not lend us the money. So resources are an obstacle or a barrier to entry. As I said earlier, labour shortages may mean potential entrants can't get skilled workers necessary to start up a business. Particularly if the skills are very specialised. Say computer skills, very specialist people are required to make computers or to program computers. Not everyone can do it. And if there's a shortage of those people, then the companies who've already got those people employed will continue to enjoy high levels of profits, presumably. The ones who can't get them simply have to stand on the sideline and wait and see what's going to happen. But they haven't got the workers to join in. They can't start competing. Raw materials may be a problem. Access to raw materials is essential before production may commence. Control of the source of raw materials therefore confers power on those who possess it. And potential entrants need to be sure of their source of raw materials. If a certain product requires particular raw materials and it's difficult to get those, that's a barrier to entry. New companies coming in may find it difficult to find suppliers. Suppliers are already committed to the one who's making it at the moment and who's enjoying abnormal profits. So the signal to enter is there. The company who's in business at the moment is making abnormal profits, but there's nothing that the entrants or the potential entrants to the business can do. They can't get in. They can't get the raw materials. The existing suppliers have a contract perhaps with the existing producer. So raw materials may be restricted. And that's a barrier to entry. Then we have the economic barriers to entry. Well, the threat of competition, for example. Let's assume that there is a highly successful producer who's earning abnormal profits. Just take this scenario, see what we think of it. Let's say there's a producer who's making abnormal profits, a highly successful one. Let's call the producer A. Now assume that a potential entrant comes on the scene. So this producer A is making abnormal profits. Now a potential entrant into the market comes on the scene. The threat of competition as a barrier to entry may now operate as follows. Producer A may call the potential entrant and threaten to reduce the price, perhaps below the average variable cost, below the cost of production. So A may threaten to cut the price below the cost of production, and this may stop the potential entrant from investing in the business. It's not nice behavior, but it could happen. It's a barrier to entry. So the producer who's making abnormal profits hears that someone's going to set up against him or her. They then call that person and say, if you join, we will cut the price and we will hold it down until you're forced out of business. Now the point is the person bluffing or not? Or are people willing to take the risk? Because it may mean a considerable investment to get in to this line of production. Well, it's a threat of competition. It may deter potential entrants. It may be a barrier to entry. There's also what we call natural monopoly and economies of scales and mergers and so on. Large firms may benefit from economies of scale, economies of size. This reduction in long-term average costs may make it difficult for new entrants to set up. Established companies who have grown, have got specialist machinery, have got discounts in borrowing from the bank, have got well-established supply chains and distribution networks, and all because of its size. And that means it can produce cheaper than new companies coming in. New companies coming in will have higher average costs. And therefore, economies of scale may be a barrier to entry. Natural monopoly occurs when a firm can serve the market at a lower price as compared to a competitive market. So a natural monopoly may be that because of the size of the market, only one firm can exist. So if a second one comes in, it's going to lose. It's going to lose out to the existing one. Or both firms could actually suffer. Perhaps both firms could go out of business because there's now too much capacity in the market. The market only requires a certain amount, and perhaps only one producer is required to make that amount. So that one producer could be making abnormal profits, and if the second one comes in, there's now too much supply on the market. And too much supply means it could be that the new one coming in is forced back out, or it could be, if they're very tenacious, that both companies suffer. But it is a barrier to entry. Financial and production barriers to entry as well. Large and established firms have privileges when borrowing finance from the banks, as I mentioned earlier. Small companies do not have the same pecuniary advantages. Banks prefer to lend to larger companies. There's less risk in lending. There's a better track record. They know what the company's performance is. They know the style of management. They know the people. So banks and financial institutions prefer established companies. So it's very difficult for new companies to get sources of finance to enter the market. There's also production and distribution barriers. Large companies are able to coordinate production through better use of the division of labour and specialised machinery. So the established businesses will have sought out all the efficiencies and worked on how to lay out the plant and getting in specialist machinery and so on. But they also have better distribution channels and better market knowledge gained through experience. So it's very difficult for new companies to compete with them. Again, it's a barrier to entry. So in this video, we've talked about many different types of barrier to entry. It's worth going back over the video and making a note of each one and just some notes on the side, what it means, what that type of barrier is. Barriers to entry is an important topic. It crops up in strategy, and it also crops up in economics, and it comes up in many different areas. But that's all I'm going to deal with. I've looked at various types here, and I think we've got enough to get an idea of what barriers to entry are. So I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.